Yes, would you ask Mr. Bailey to come back in, please? Thank you. Right, Mr. Bailey,
Yes,
ready to go on?
Yes.
Thank you. Yes, Mr. Millett.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Bailey, I just want to revisit one or two answers you gave us this morning on the subject of assurances given by Mr. Room to Harley. You, I think, referred earlier this morning, and it's page 62, lines 12 to 13, and again at page 66 at line 20, to an email to Celetex saying along the lines of, you need to convince us this stuff is as good as Rockwool or we won't be using it.
Yes.
I just want to explore that a little bit more. Can you please be shown CEL 6019? Now this is an email from Jonathan Room to Daniel Alcatel Jones on the 21st of January 2015. And Mr. Room says, I've attached the 12-page BS 8414 report showing the build-up and components used. In addition, I'm sending you the thermocouple graphs showing the temperatures at each level of the test. I'm not able to send you the BS 476 test document as this is confidential. Now, you're not copied in on this email, but just looking at it, is this the email, do you think, that you were referring to in your evidence this morning?
I don't know. I've not seen this.
No, but you referred to an email or
I referred to an
assurances.
email that Daniel sent to
Yes.
Celetex asking for clarification.
Yeah. And if you, well, all right, fair enough. If you scroll down, then to the question Mr. Ankerfield Jones asked Mr. Room on the 20th of January. Let's just scroll down a bit more. Let's just have a look at that email in full. Perhaps we can go to the bottom of that email chain, actually, and just follow it up. I think that's it. 16th of January. Daniel Ankerfield Jones, 16th of January to Jonathan Room. Good morning, John. Sorry, I've got a headache for you. We're being asked by one of our clients to see the test results and certificates for the RS5000 insulation. They want to know exactly how it was installed when tested to BS8414, who carried out the testing, how it was fixed, what it was covered with, what cladding was used, what support structure, etc., and most importantly, the results. Drawings and/or photos of the test setup would help show how it was installed, but I imagine these form part of the test results anyway. They also want to see the certificate and results for the test to BS 476 Part 7 showing the index rating achieved during the test. Could you sort this out for us, please? We're hoping to put this forward on most of the cladding jobs, so having this information to hand would be most useful. Now, obviously, there'll be questions for Mr. Ankerfield Jones about this evidence or email, but to your knowledge, was this series of questions, or was the client asking this series of detailed questions, any of those working on the Grenfell Tower project?
I don't know.
Do you remember which client it was that had asked these detailed questions about RS5000?
I don't know.
You don't know. Did you remember having a discussion with Mr. Ankerfield Jones to the effect that a client, whoever it was asking headache-giving questions about RS5000?
No.
Okay. Can we just scroll up then to the next page? And then we see there's an email from Daniel Ankerfield Jones on the 20th of January 2015. If you can scroll down, you can see that the message is morning. Well, there's a message before that on the 19th. Morning, Dan. Hope you had a good weekend. I'm checking the test report. I will check the test reports and what we're allowed to send out. And then Daniel Ankerfield Jones back to Jonathan Room, and you can't quite see, I'm afraid, the top of that email, but if you scroll up to the bottom of page 1, top of page 2, we can see here is Jonathan, here is Daniel Ankerfield Jones going back to Jonathan Room on the 20th of January. That's bottom of page 1, top of page 2. Fingers crossed you can get this for us. I'm worried that if this can't be cleared up, then we will have to change to Rockwool Duo Slab, as this has the necessary backup to appease the specialists. And just pausing there, is that the message or email that you were referring to this morning when you say you need to convince us this stuff is as good as Rockwool or we won't be using it?
I think it must be, yes.
It must be. Do you remember having a conversation with Daniel Anketell-Jones about this message?
No.
How did you know then, when you were giving evidence this morning, that there was an email to Celetex saying words along the lines of, and your words this morning, you need to convince us this stuff is as good as Rockwool or we won't be using it?
I think I've seen it in an email bundle.
I see. Then we then look at the document I started with, the email I started with at the top of this page, top of page 1, I should say. This is the final message in this email string from Jonathan Room, and I've read you the first paragraph. I'll just go back to the second. I'm not able to send you the BS 476 test document as this is confidential. I'd be surprised if you were able to get this or any other report from the manufacturer, to be honest. In lieu of this, I've attached the data sheet showing confirmation of the products having BS 476 Part 6 and 7, which gives this Class 0 performance, in addition to the BS 8414 test. I would ask that these documents are not shared outside of the network of you and your specialist advisor for this project. Please give me a call when you have a moment to discuss. Did you know that this was the response, or the tenor of the response that Celetex had given to Mr. Anketell-Jones in response to his request?
No.
We don't see anything in here about any assurance from Celetex that RS5000 was safe to use on buildings in excess of 18 metres in height, do we?
No.
Can I then ask you, well, did you have a conversation with Mr. Anketell-Jones about this email and what he was sent by Celetex, do you think?
I don't recall, no.
If the email that we looked at before about, if we can't clear it up, we'll have to change to Rockwool Duo Slab, is not the email you were referring to earlier, would you agree with me that the reply from Mr. Room cannot be read as any kind of assurance that RS5000 was safe to use at Grenfell?
Looking at this email now, I would agree with you.
Yes. Can I then turn to the statement of Jonathan Room? This is CEL 3010031, and I'd like to look at page 22, please. Paragraph 73. That's CEL 3010031. Now that's page 1. And if we can go to paragraph 73 on page 22, please. He says there, and I'll read it all to you, on the 11th of February 2015, I had an email exchange with Ben Bailey of HCW, Harley Curtain Wall, which I exhibit as JWRR34, see page 24, in relation to Grenfell Tower. I asked for the construction section drawing so that Celetex technical team could replicate the thermal calculations U value previously modelled by Daniel at HCW. Ben sent the drawings via a Dropbox link. Celetex prohibited the use of Dropbox facilities. Therefore, I had to forward to my personal email account to download and view the drawings. I identified two relevant drawings, which I exhibit as JWRR35, page 456, and exhibit 36 at page 457, and sent them back to my work email address. These drawings were then emailed to the technical team and asked if they could see if a U value of 0.15 with 150 millimeters for RS5000, I think I should say, could be achieved. I explained that there was a 150 millimeter existing concrete wall and 150 millimeters to stroke 160 millimeters RS5000. This email I exhibit as JWRR 37, page 8724. Now, just looking at that, do you agree from what Mr. Room says there that Celetex were only asked to check U values and not the fire performance of RS 5000?
On that date, yes, I would.
And it appears that the drawings weren't sent by Ben Bailey with a comment, please check or confirm that your product was suitable for use in this build-up, as set out in attached drawings.
No, I think this one was to do with insulation.
Yes. To do with insulation, to do with U values.
Yes.
Yes. Thank you. Now, can I turn to a different topic, which is specification of insulation products in the Harley spec. Can we go, please, to RYD 3046822? Now, this is a document entitled Specification Notes. This particular version, as you can see, is revision D, dated the 15th of July 2015. And you can see that, in fact, it was originally created on the 15th of January 2015, as you can see from the date at the very bottom.
Yes.
Correct?
Mm-hmm.
That's it. There are earlier versions of this. This is as late as July. If you look at the document on the left-hand side, you can see the specification for the things going onto the building. We don't see anywhere there any reference to any insulation. Looking at it, do you agree with that?
I agree with you.
We've never seen a version of the specification that does contain any specification of the insulation product to be used at Grenfell. Is that right?
It appears so, yes.
Why is that?
I can't answer that.
Do you know why the insulation product was omitted from... well, do you know who might be able to tell us why the insulation product was omitted from the Harley system specification?
You need to ask Kevin.
If we look at RYD 3046822, please, at page 4 and 5, the same document, pages 4 and 5, we can see there that despite showing insulation, you can see the wiggly lines, which are a legend or mark for insulation. We don't see any reference to an insulation type or insulation product. That's correct, isn't it?
It is.
Do you know why these drawings omitted any identification of the insulation product to be used in that location?
The specification drawing you referred to is basically a key, so that the notes are not put on all of the drawings.
Right.
So that's why there's a specification drawing. It is just to reference the materials being used. I can't understand why the insulation wasn't shown on that drawing.
Would that be normal, not to have the insulation shown on either the drawing or in the specification?
No, I don't think it would be.
Can you explain why there was a departure from normal practice in the case of this specification for Grenfell Tower, then?
No, I can't, except it wasn't that nobody knew what the insulation was.
Well, it wasn't that nobody knew what the insulation was, which means they did know, and therefore you can't explain why it wasn't.
Everybody knew what the insulation was. I can't explain why it wasn't written on the drawing.
We can see from this document, if we go back to page 1 again, perhaps it's even clearer, that Studio E had stamped this document as A, conforms to design intent, and I think Harley had stamped it issued for approval. Did Harley, to your knowledge, flag up the omission of the identification of the insulation product to Studio E or anybody else?
Sorry, can you repeat?
Yes, did they flag it up?
That it wasn't on the drawing?
Yes.
No, I think if we realised it, we really should have put it on.
And not in the spec? Did anybody flag up the fact that it wasn't in the spec?
No.
No. Can I just ask you one or two questions about Rockwool?
Yeah.
Is it right that you would usually use Rockwool as your insulation product in a rain screen cladding for a high-rise building?
Yes.
It was used at Chalcots, I think we know that. I think it was also used at Ferrier Point.
Correct.
Was it used at Little Venice?
Yes.
Did you ever consider, on the Grenfell Tower project, whether Rockwool would be a more appropriate insulation product for use at Grenfell than either FR or RS 5000?
Given the thermal requirements and the cladding zone that we had, it was the only product which would achieve the U value.
Did you yourself get into the calculations to see whether or not the U value was appropriate, or the measurements which for the cladding system which the product was to fill were appropriate, and compare those with Rockwool, and what would happen if Rockwool were used?
No, I didn't. The cladding zone was set out by the architect, so the area that we had to put insulation in was determined long before we were involved. And given the desire of the client to produce a warm building for the residents, that was the product and as I say, the design was handed down to us, and we had at that point no concerns with it, because we expected, by the time we received it to be fully compliant.
Did you know that Rockwool could have been used and achieved similar U values and similar dimensions and thicknesses?
No.
Do you accept that that was possible?
Sat here, I don't.
All right. Now, can I ask you to look at paragraph 44 of your statement at page 11? You say there, as regards the use of Rockwool as an alternative to Celetex, I'm now aware that Rockwool had contacted the project client with a view to consideration being given to the use of their products. The project client then appeared to have passed this inquiry straight on to Ryden. Ryden, at least initially, appeared to have been interested in the use of Rockwool because it may have opened up some eco-funding for the project. Contact was made, it may have been by Mark Harris, with Rockwool, who explained that funding may only become available if Rockwool had provided the complete system, that is, cladding panels, rails and insulation. By this relatively late stage, all the bids had been based on the request for Celetex with Renabond panels, and, furthermore, Celetex offered a higher insulation rating. It's for this reason, as I understand the position, that Rockwool was not used at Grenfell. Both Celetex and Rockwool had the same British Class 0 rating. Is this paragraph, I've read it to you in full, is it telling us what you knew at the time, or is this a commentary on the documents that you've been shown when preparing your statement?
I think it's stuff that I knew at the time.
You knew this at the time, did you? Did you yourself have any role in deciding not to use Rockwool at Grenfell Tower?
No.
Who was the person who ultimately made that decision?
I think because the eco funding fell away, the Celetex was used as per the specification.
Did you or anyone else at Harley, to your knowledge, consider whether Rockwool would be a preferable insulant from a fire safety perspective?
No.
Did you or anyone else at Harley seek any information about the fire performance of Rockwool insulation in comparison with RS 5000?
We carried out the analysis of Celetex, as we spoke about earlier, and as far as we were concerned, that was compliant and performed. we knew from past experience that Rockwool was performed as well.
When you say we carried out the analysis of Celetex, as we spoke about earlier, is that a shorthand for the evidence that you were giving us this morning
It
about
was, yes.
discussions with Celetex?
Yes.
Right. Is it fair to say that Rockwool was only considered from an eco-funding perspective as opposed to a fire safety perspective?
As far as I'm aware, yes.
Yes. I then want to turn to a different topic, which is the resourcing of the Harley team on this project. Can I start with HAR 406092, please? Now, this is an email from Mark Harris to Rob Maxwell and you on the 19th of June 2014. And he says, Rob, to keep you in the loop, contract stuff is starting to hit us now on the Grenfell Tower front. Some of the items below and attached are for estimating. However, there are many items which need looking at by our proposed Grenfell House construction team. And therein lies the problem. We don't fucking have one. To say I'm concerned about this is an understatement. Can you explain why Mr. Harris's concerns were only being raised at this stage in mid-June 2014, which was long after Harley had already been involved in significant discussions with Studio E and Ryden about the design of the cladding system?
I can't understand why it was raised at that stage, no.
And you received this email. Did you have any discussion with Mr. Maxwell or Mr. Harris about it?
Yes, afterwards.
After what?
After receiving the email.
Right. And what did you discuss?
How we were resourcing the project.
Okay, let's see how we proceed. But in a nutshell, can you just tell us what did you decide to do as a result of Mark Harris's concerns as expressed to you?
The initial, Rob is the contracts manager, and he needs to start controlling it as we are picking up the order. The date here is the 19th of the 6th. I think we got the order for the job in July. So the first elements that we deal with are the design, and Daniel then took over as project lead because he was designing the project.
Yes. What was the immediate decision that you made in the hours, minutes, days after receiving Mark Harris's email on the 19th of June?
That we need to put Daniel in charge of the design.
I see. Can I ask you to look at the next email down in the chain, which was the precursor to Mark Harris's email to you? This is from Zach Maynard at Ryden to Mark Harris, not copied to you, but you saw it the next day, of the 18th of June. And he says, Mark, apologies for the delay. I've been writing the below for the last 2 days and keep getting dragged off onto other things. However, I have copy and pasted it into this email. And he then sets out a list, if you go over to page 2, of about 26 items. Well, not about. It is 26 items, which he wanted to see in the costs build-up. Can you help me? What items in that costs build-up list could Harley not quote for without a construction team in place?
Not quote for.
Yes, it's a long list, but I mean, are there, just casting your eye down it, are there any items in that 26-item list which Harley couldn't quote for without having a construction team in place?
No, the estimators would have picked all of this up.
Right. Then why did it come as a surprise to Mr. Harris then that he was being asked all this now, and there was a problem which needed a resolution?
No, I think what he was saying in the email is they're about to place an order with us, and as soon as the order is placed, they're going to want someone to jump on it. So I think he was forewarning that in a couple of weeks' time, it's going to start running. Is that what he says?
Well, no, to be frank, it isn't. If you go back to page 1, can you please look at the paragraph I read to you? Some of the items below, he says, are attached after estimating. However, there are many items which need looking at by our proposed Grenfell House construction team, and therein lies the problem. We don't fucking have one. So my question is, given that 26-item list, what in that list were there? What were the many items which needed looking by the non-existent Grenfell House construction team?
Can you roll it back up?
Yes. Sorry, I'm sorry. Could you go to page 2, please? Thank you.
Only item 16, but the estimators are capable of filling that in anyway.
Right. So, are you saying that, in fact, apart possibly from item 16, all of those, or the remaining 25 items, were items which could be managed by the existing Grenfell House team? And that Mark Harris is wrong when he says there are many items which need looking at by our proposed Grenfell House construction team.
Yes.
I see. Now, if you go to the third paragraph down in his email on page 1, he says, there is no doubt that this job is starting to gather pace. Brighton are fully on board with the client and will start setting up on site in the next few days. They will issue a contract to us shortly, which will underwrite initial design. Once we have that in our possession, I guarantee that the architect will expect our design to commence. In addition, we need to install the mock-up on site in the next 2 weeks. Would it be usual for Harley's design work not to have commenced at all by this stage?
Yes, we had no contract, no letter of intent, so we wouldn't have started any design.
So when Mark Harris says to you, contract stuff is starting to hit us now on the Grenfell Tower front, what did you understand he meant?
Again, if you go to the next page down,
Certainly, yes, of course.
it's all this stuff is starting to come through. This is a precursor to design being started.
Right. I mean, to be fair to you, Mr. Bailey, you are right that the letter of intent discussions did not take place until July and into August and September this year. But it looks very much from this as, although Mark Harris has called it contract stuff, there was a need for urgency in terms of getting on top of the design. And my question is, how did it all happen so quickly, and would that be usual?
Not unusual. We're waiting for an order, then we'll start the design.
Right. And did it take you by surprise that suddenly you had to start doing all these things?
No.
Right. Mr. Harris then goes on to say in the final main paragraph, the last thing I want to do is to walk away from the job. Believe me, I've invested many months of time into this, not least because it would severely damage our relationship with Brighton. And worse still, would potentially leave the door open for Tim Lovell and co. However, unless we can gear up and service it, we are doomed to fail. We need to have an honest and frank team chat about this job on Friday. What did you understand by the reference to Tim Lovell there?
They're one of our competitors.
Right. He was an employee at Harley, wasn't he, in 2012?
He was.
And he's left and set up on his own in competition with Harley, is that it?
Correct.
Okay. Was there a team meeting on Friday? Do you remember?
I can't recall, but there could well have been.
What plans did Harley put in place after this to ensure that there was sufficient resource on the project in order to be able to meet these matters and make estimates for them?
Well, the estimates will be taken care of by the estimating department, which is Mike Alberston basically in place, and on the design side, Daniel took over that, and we looked at recruiting some additional design resource to assist him.
Was that done more quickly than would be normal due to the pressures of this job that, according at least to Mark Harris's email, you suddenly found yourself under?
I wouldn't have said it was particularly unusual.
Can I ask you to look at HAR 406153? This is Rob Maxwell's reply to Mark Harris's email we've just been studying. And this is the same day. He says, Mark, we need to get an external design team on this now. I can pull in a project/site manager within a couple of weeks. We could use Neil or Ben to attend a meeting in the next couple of weeks. From our discussion on Monday in the office about this job, it would be a shame to let this go. If I'm honest, it would be better to let Karma go, as we know the client and our risk is less as a consequence. Let's talk on Friday to try and find a way to cope. I don't need the last line there. First, what's the reference to letting Karma go?
There were, at the time, there were two projects that we were looking at, Karma and Grenfell Tower, and we had a choice of which one to accept. We couldn't take both. We didn't have the capacity to take both. Right. So we decided that let Karma go.
And what was Karma?
A high-rise overcladding in Wembley.
Right, in Wembley. Why was it better to let Karma go and do Grenfell?
I think Karma was actually, whilst it's overcladding, it's a new build, and refurbishment is actually a better project to be involved in for us.
Why is that?
Because if it's an existing building, it's there, and there's usually less delays on site. Right. If it's a new build, we're waiting for concrete to be poured, and there's lots of things that can go wrong.
And is it also fair to say that because you knew the client, it was better to go with Grenfell?
We knew the client for Karma as well.
You knew the client. Well, he says, does Rob Maxwell, and as we know the client, it would be a shame to let this go. If I'm honest, it would be better to let Karma go, as we know the client and our risk is less as a consequence. So did the fact that you knew the client play in the decision to opt to do the Grenfell project?
Both the fact that we knew the client and it was it wasn't a new build.
Right. The client being Ryden?
Yes.
Yeah. Does this also tell us that, in fact, within Harley, although an awful lot of involvement and work had been done in the months and indeed years prior to the June of 2014, Harley had not actually decided to commit to being the cladding subcontractor on the Grenfell Tower project until June 2014?
We wanted to do it, but until Ryden appointed us, they could always go with somebody else.
Right. When you say you wanted to do it, did you also want to do Karma? I mean, did you have capacity to do both?
We didn't have capacity to do both.
Right, but you were running both.
Yes, because we don't know which one's going to drop.
I see. At what point would one drop and one stand up?
Well, whichever one they gave us the order for first.
Right. Now, Mr. Harris refers to the need for a construction team in his email to look at Zach Maynard's proposal. And Rob Maxwell, as we can see here, says in response, we need to get an external design team on this now. Do you agree that the terms of Mr. Harris's and Mr. Maxwell's emails, here we've seen, suggest a single additional recruit was insufficient to deal with what was appearing to emerge as a problem?
No.
Why is that?
The initial design details need to be dealt with first, and that's one person can deal with that. And then we start moving into the productionization of the design once it's been signed off by the architect. On Grenfell, on a high-rise building, the lower floors are usually different, the top's different, but the middle 20 or so floors are the same. So in terms of design, once we design one floor, it repeats up. So we don't need a whole design team on this. The two guys working on it is sufficient, particularly at the initial stages. If we need additional design throughout the project, we can bring them in later or transfer people across. In fact, Mark Stapley assisted on occasion with the design.
Why was it necessary to bring in an external design team as opposed to using your existing in-house design capabilities?
Because it gives us flexibility in our capacity.
Was bringing in Kevin Lamb as a designer your solution?
Yes.
Was he brought in because Harley lacked the design expertise itself, or because...
No, not the design expertise. The actual we needed to increase our design resource
Right.
at that stage.
I see. So this was about numbers of
Yes.
designers. Right. Just on Kevin Lamb, it's right, I think, that he'd only worked for Harley once before,
Yes.
and that was on a job doing design details for a project proposal, wasn't it?
Yes.
What was that project?
I can't recall.
How familiar with his work were you?
He'd worked, personally, I wasn't. He worked with Daniel for, I think, 2 or 3 years prior to Daniel joining us.
I see. So he was a contact of Daniel Untitled Jones's. Is that how he came to be
Yes,
contacted?
I think he was Daniel's boss, actually.
Right. I see. Did Harley look at any other external designers for the Grenfell Tower project other than Kevin Lamb?
Yes, I had a meeting with a designer that I knew, and we also, although we didn't talk to them about it, considered using Wintec. Wintec had done other design work for us on a previous project.
As you mentioned Wintec yesterday. Who was the designer that you did meet?
A chap called Jerry Clutterbuck.
Jerry Clutterbuck. Which was his firm? Or did he have a firm?
It was, I can't remember his firm, but it was basically him.
And what was your experience of him?
I'd worked with him a number of years ago, and he's been a freelance designer on high-rise buildings for 20, 30 years.
Which projects?
That I worked with him on.
I'm so sorry, you're right. Which of the Harley projects did you use Jerry Clutterbuck as your designer?
Not with Harley. There's
I see.
predates my design.
Oh, prior to Harley.
Yes.
Right. Looking at Chalcots and Ferrier Point, who were the designers on that? Was that a Harley design team, or did you have externals on those projects?
Those two, I think Daniel did Ferrier Point,
Right.
and Mark Stapley did Chalcots.
Right. So you didn't have externals.
Well, at Chalcot, we actually had a chap called. Sorry, my brain's gone.
Not to worry. Did you have an external designer on Chalcots?
We did to assist. Mark Hayward.
Mark Hayward.
Yes.
Right. Is Mark Hayward connected with CEP?
He is.
Yes, the name's familiar. So is that how you got the cladding design, or cladding designer, through CEP for that project?
He wasn't through CEP. Whilst he works with CEP, he's independent of them, so he did some design work on that for us.
I see. Is it fair to say that between June and August 2014, Harley was pretty desperate for some immediately available design expertise, extra expertise, and you took Kevin Lamb on for the want of anyone better?
No, I wouldn't say that.
All right. Can I just ask you one or two questions about Ben Bailey, your son? You told us yesterday that he's 31. Does that mean that in 2013 he would have been about 25?
Yes.
24 or 25?
Yes.
Yes. At that point, how much? Well, let me try it this way around. He was formally appointed to the role of project manager, the Harley project manager for the Grenfell Tower project in the February of 2015, wasn't
Yes.
he? Who preceded him?
The role of project manager at that point was being carried out by Rob Maxwell, the contracts manager.
I see. And at the point of Ben Bailey's appointment as project manager for Harley in February 2015, aged 25, how much site experience had he had?
He just finished being a project manager on a high-rise curtain wall project, the value of which was probably double that of Grenfell.
Which was that project?
It's a project called Merit House.
Merit House. And when did he start as project manager on Merit House?
It would have been 2 years before that.
Age 23.
Yes.
And before Merit House, did he have any experience of project management?
He has worked for the company during his university holidays since 2009. So he's very familiar with project management.
Merit House 2013, that was his first project manager role, was it?
It was 13. No, it was before that.
Before that?
So I'm
I'm
losing track of the.
All right, let me try and clear it up. When did Ben Bailey become project manager on the Merit House project?
Sorry, you're right, it's 2013.
2013. And he would have been 23 years old at that stage, and that was his first project manager job.
Yes.
Yes. So he had never been a project manager before being appointed project manager to Merit House.
No, he was a project coordinator.
Yes.
So he stepped up from being project coordinator to being project manager.
Yes. Did you or anyone else at Harley conduct a recruitment exercise to look for a project manager within Harley for Grenfell Tower?
No.
How did Ben Bailey get the job then?
When he completed Merit House, we moved him on to Grenfell Tower.
I see. Did he get the job because he was your son?
No.
How can you account for appointing a 25-year-old whose experience of project management had started when he was 23 on a prior project for the position of project manager on the Grenfell Tower project?
His experience working on Merit House.
All right. I'm going to ask you some questions now about cavity barriers. Now, could you please go to your statement at page 16? I'd like to look at paragraph... Excuse me. I'd like to look at paragraph 62. You describe there email discussions relating to cavity barriers in March 2015. And I'll just show you that. I'm not going to read it out to you. But is it right that this paragraph is a summary of what you read in the documents, or do you actually have a recollection of these emails?
It's difficult to remember now what I knew then and what I read in between, but so I can't remember what I knew when.
No, that's fair enough. Can I then go to RYD 3737117? Now, this is an email from you on the 27th of March 2015 to Simon Lawrence, Neil Crawford and Ben Bailey, copy to Simon O'Connor, Kevin Lamb and Daniel Jones. And there is a context to this, quite a lengthy context to this. So I just want, if I can, just to scroll to the bottom of this email and scan up to this email. Can we please go to the bottom email in this chain? just want to show it to you first of all. It starts at the bottom with an email from Ricky Kay on the 26th of March. He's Siderise to Ben Bailey, copied to Lamb and Dapley. You didn't see this, and it's all about. He includes an extract from approved document B on the subject of. Trying to summarise it, fire integrity and insulation in relation to cavity barriers. And then if we look at the next email up on page 2, please, there's an email from Ben Bailey to Simon Lawrence. Again, you don't see the... sorry, you are copied in on this one, actually. Mm-hmm. Simon, as discussed, please see the email below from the fire break supplier. Quite a large cost difference between what Siderise and the spec recommend and upgrading to the 120-minute barriers we discussed on Thursday. Can you forward this to the client's representative for approval, please? And then Simon Lawrence sends this to Studio E, copied to Simon O'Connor on the 27th of March. And then at the very top of that page, Neil Crawford of Studio E comes back to Simon Lawrence, saying he'd spoken with John, that's John Hoban, and he wasn't happy with Harley's email as we're talking about fast stopping as opposed to cavity barriers. I've explained again the specifics of our scenario, and he will have a conversation with Paul Hanson to see if there's a reduced spec they can agree to, and we'll then speak with Harley's direct. And then if we look at the next page up, Simon Lawrence to Neil Crawford, and you're copied in. Thanks for checking, Neil. Ben C. Neil's response, it doesn't look promising. And then you come in with your email at the top of that to Simon Lawrence, Neil Crawford, and Ben Bailey, etc. Hi, Simon. Reading the email from the specialist supplier's facade manager, that's Ricky Kay, as we saw at the bottom. It should be fairly straightforward. A fire stop is required to stop fire spreading between floors or party walls if it's inside the building, i.e. inside of the window or curtain wall. The cavity barrier is required to stop fire spreading inside the cavity. For the fire to enter the cavity, it has to have gone through the window or curtain wall. In our situation, the cladding is outside of the windows, and therefore it should have a cavity barrier as opposed to a fire stop. Does that email reflect your understanding at the time of the distinction between cavity barriers and fire stopping?
Correct.
Where had you got that understanding from? I'm not saying it's wrong, I just want to know where it's from.
Experience, I suppose.
Was it your conclusion that the facade was required to contain cavity barriers rather than fire stopping to prevent the fire from entering the cavity?
The cavity barriers don't stop it from entering the cavity. They stop it travelling round the cavity.
Yeah. Were you alive to the importance of effective cavity barriers around windows, particularly around these windows, to prevent fire from progressing into a cavity between the external wall and the rain screen?
This comes back to the industry practice that if you've got a single window in a compartment, it's not always regarded as necessary, except according to approved document B, that is an incorrect assumption.
Just so I understand, well, first of all, where does this industry practice that you're referring to come from? Where does your understanding of that come from?
On a number of projects that we've done where we have this situation, the building control will decide whether or not the cavity barriers are necessary around the windows. And so, again, with this is why we always ask, with cavity barriers, we ask the architect, building control, where they want them, what do they want. So we've gone along with that.
In your answer before last, you also said it's not always regarded as necessary, except according to approved document B. That is an incorrect assumption.
Yes, I accept that.
Right, okay. Well, that may shorten things. I just want to be clear about it. By way of a little build-up to that, just looking at the email I showed you at the top of page 2 about John Hoban not being happy with Harley's email, what was your impression of the professional's understanding of the differences between fire stopping and cavity barriers?
I thought he'd made a mistake.
Did it surprise or concern you that there appeared to be a significant level of confusion or mistake, as you put it, among the professionals in this chain, even at this late stage of the project?
Yeah, I suppose it did.
It did concern you.
I didn't think it surprised me.
It surprised you, all right. Given that surprise, did you... Well, what did you do? I suppose is the best question I can ask you, given the fact that you had felt surprised about the degree of confusion.
Well, I think the email that I sent was try to clarify the position as we understood it.
Did you check the guidance in approved document B before reaching the view that only cavity barriers were required, or were you already familiar with the provisions of approved document B in relation to cavity barriers?
I was familiar with the provision of cavity barriers and what they need to do in their fire performance as necessary.
Now, I think you say now that you've accepted that it was an erroneous understanding, and that you do need cavity barriers around windows because they're an opening. Accept that, I think.
I accept that.
Yes, I see. So I don't think we need to look at it. Can I then take a step out from the topic for a moment and ask you about the Chalcots fire?
Yes.
I think we can take this quite shortly, but you remember that there was a fire in 2012 at Chalcots? Yes? Yes. And just to clear up one or two things about Chalcots, the cladding system in Chalcots was a Ryden Harley job, wasn't it?
It was.
It had mineral wool insulation, yes?
Correct.
It had Reynobond PE55 face fix, not cassette.
Correct.
Correct. And there was a fire there in 2012. Was one of the lessons that you learnt from that fire that it was immensely important to stop the fire exiting the compartment of origin and into the cladding system, that there should be extensive fire breaks around the head and sill of each window?
At Camden, the window system was different. They weren't individual windows. They were stripped windows running from the bottom of the building to the top. So, as such, they effectively were a curtain wall, and therefore the barriers at the head and at the sill of the window were not cavity barriers, they were fire stopping.
Well, let's first have a look then. Can we look at the Harley incident report form for the Chalcots fire? This is HAR 3010169. And this relates to the fire that was that broke out on the 16th/17th of January 2012. And this is a report dated the 17th of January. We can see that you were on the distribution list of the report, even though you weren't, I think, at the investigation.
Correct.
And the purpose of the report is to record the initial findings. Can I can take it that you saw this report at the time?
Yes.
Yes. If you go to the bottom of page 2, please, you can see that there are some photographs. Just pick this up. That was what the fire looked like on the outside of the building. Just on that, while we're there, did you learn from this experience that when ACM catches fire and burns on the exterior of the building, the ACM would burn and drip downwards?
No, we saw that it would burn, or I presume there would be some dripping if it's aluminium.
If we go to page 4, there are two photographs. Above the first one, it says, the fire had caused extensive damage to the living room, the windows and building structure, as all had been subject to extensively high temperatures. And there we see the photograph of who turned in the end out to be Steve Blake, pointing at the windows. And it says underneath that, it was evident that despite the fire and the amount of flammable items in the flat, such as paper, etc., the fire breaks were still intact and prevented the fire spreading between flats. The Harley-designed fire break system is visible. Now the surrounding fabric has melted under the extensive heat. Did you understand, or do you understand, what was meant there by fire breaks in the context of this photograph?
It was fire stopping.
So not cavity barriers.
No.
Were these breaks behind the cladding, or was there fire stopping elsewhere?
This fire stopping was from the concrete slab to the back of the. I'll call it. It's not a curtain wall.
Right. Do you know why Harley constantly used the expression fire breaks
I think that's.
as opposed to fire stops? Or
I think it's just a generic term that's used within the industry, and it covers cavity barriers and fire stops. Cavity barrier is not interchangeable with a fire stop, but the overall term is fire breaks.
it has the potential, therefore, would you accept, to cause confusion as to whether anybody using the term fire breaks is referring to cavity barriers or fire stops?
Yeah, possibly, but not if you're doing what we do.
Who designed the Harley-designed fire break system?
On there, it may have been Mark Stapley.
Right. Do you know whether it was used at Grenfell Tower?
No, we had no fire stopping.
Or fire breaks?
No, we had cavity barriers.
Not around the windows?
We had cavity barriers on the slab and on the party walls, yes.
Right. Well, my question is, why weren't the Harley-designed fire break system, why wasn't that used around the windows at Grenfell Tower in the way that it had been used at Chalkett?
As I explained earlier, because there was one window within the compartment, for the fire to spread between flats, it had to go past a cavity barrier. And sorry, just go back to this. This was the design handed down by the architect. We accept we have a responsibility. It was signed off by Exova before we started. During the many discussions we had about the cavity barriers, increasing it to 2-hour fire stopping, which wouldn't work. Side-Arise, the cavity barrier manufacturers, did not show cavity barriers around the windows, down the jambs, or tied to the head. So we have a raft of people looking at this and not picking up that there is a problem, that it doesn't comply. So we put our hands up for our part in it, but there are 5 or 6 levels of supervision to pick these things up.
Well, Mr. Bailey, never mind about others. I'm asking you, and you were involved in the Taplow experience, as was Wrighton for that matter. But did the Taplow House experience not teach you that the failure to place cavity barriers or fire stops, a fire break in your parts around the windows, create a serious risk of the spread of fire from the compartment of origin to the cladding?
That because they are different, they serve different functions. So what happened at Camden is a different situation from what we were faced at Grenfell.
Yeah, and my question again is, given the lessons that you Harley had learned at Taplow House, why didn't those lessons cause you to bring them to bear when examining precisely what was going to go around the windows at Grenfell?
And we accept that's an error.
Can we look at approved document B, which I think will crystallise the error? Page 82, please, paragraph 9.1. And I want 9.1, 9.2 and 9.3, please, there. If you It's CLG 50224. Yes, that's page 1. If we go, I'm so sorry, my fault, page 82, I should have told you. If we look at paragraph 9.1 on page 82, let's start with that. I want, as I say, 9.1, 9.2, and 9.3. But 9.1, concealed spaces or cavities in the construction of a building provide a ready route for smoke and flame spread. This is particularly so in the case of voids in, above, and below the construction of a building. For example, walls, floors, ceilings, and roofs. As any spread is concealed, it presents a greater danger than would a more obvious weakness in the fabric of a building. That's 9.1. Just pausing there, would you agree with me that here ADB is drawing specific attention to fires within a cavity where flame spread is less obvious?
We agree with that.
And that would include behind a facade or behind a rain
Correct.
screen. Looking at diagram 33 on page 82, just below it, you can see provisions for cavity barriers. Are you familiar with this diagram, or were you at the time?
Yes.
If we look at it closely, we can see that it shows a window and specifically instructs designers to close around openings. Do you see that?
I do.
Yeah. So it would have been possible, wouldn't it, at Grenfell to comply with the requirements of diagram 33 by putting cavity barriers in all the locations required by diagram 33?
I think we've accepted that.
Yes. Now, 9.2 gives you provision of cavity barriers for specific locations, and that refers to diagram 33, which we've looked at, also extensive cavities. And then it goes on to say, consideration should also be given to the construction and fixing of cavity barriers provided for these purposes and the extent to which openings in them should be protected. See 913 and 916. And then 9.3, over the top of page 83, it says, cavity barriers should be provided to close the edges of cavities, including around openings. And then it goes on to add to that. So I think you accept that as a result of 9.1, 9.2, diagram 33 and 9.3, cavity barriers should have been provided around the windows at Grenfell, in accordance with the guidance.
Yes.
Now, going back then to the email chain, if I can, please. HAR 406585. He says, this is an email to Daniel Anketel-Jones, which you forward to him, seeking his input. You say, Dan, do you have any comments? You see that halfway
Yes.
down. And then he comes back to you, the top of that page, same day, 27th of March 2015, just that it's ridiculous. There's no point in fire stopping. As we all know, the ACM will be gone rather quickly in a fire. The whole point is to stop unseen fire spreading in the cavity and moving to other parts of the building. Who is John and who is Paul? Are we working to the NBS spec by Studio E? Now, did you understand that the ACM cladding panels would melt and fall off the building rather quickly in a fire?
In the CWCT guidance, there is no fire performance for a cladding system or it has no ability to resist fire. And it is recognised that the cladding, whatever it is, would not be expected to last more than 10 to 20 minutes. And Dan's point there, I think, is you can't fire stop for 2 hours against a panel that will have gone in 10 or 20 minutes.
Does that tell us that you were aware, and certainly he was aware, that the ACM proposed was combustible?
No.
Well, how would you explain what he's saying then? As we all know, the ACM will be gone rather quickly in a fire. Why would it be gone if it wasn't combustible?
Because it may melt. Glass is not combustible, and that wouldn't last 2 hours with fire stopping against the back of it. Aluminium is non-combustible. That wouldn't last 2 hours with fire stopping against it. So it's no different. than those products. The fact that it may be gone quite quickly, I think Dan's talking quarter of an hour, does not mean that it is combustible.
Did you share his understanding that ACM would be gone rather quickly in a fire?
With who?
I'm sorry. Did you agree in your own mind with Daniel Grenfell-Jones that ACM would be gone rather quickly in a fire?
I agree with Daniel that any cladding product in rain screen will be gone rather quickly. Or I say rather quickly, it's not a good phrase, but it will not last 2 hours. Typically, a cladding panel will last 10, 20 minutes.
Well, there's nothing about 2 hours. I mean, rather quickly is rather quickly.
No, this is in response to, shall we put a 2-hour fire stop against the back of it?
I see. Did you understand Mr. Grenfell-Jones to be indicating that there was no point installing fire-resistant products, specifically cavity barriers, within the cavity of the rain screen because they wouldn't have anything to expand against to resist the spread of fire because the rain screen would have fallen off very quickly?
If we go back to fire stopping, in 2 hours' time there would be no panels there. In 20 minutes' time there would be no panels there. The cavity barriers are supposed to stop the chimney effect and the spread of smoke around the building. If the panels aren't there, we no longer have a chimney, and therefore the draw of the fire up the inside of the cavity will stop.
So there was no point effectively having any effective cavity barriers within the rain screen system?
No, the half-hour cavity barriers will stop the spread within the cavity until such time as the cavity disappears.
How do you reconcile his and your understanding that ACM would be gone rather quickly in a fire with what you understood to be its fire performance qualities as communicated to you by the BBA certificate that we were discussing this morning?
The fire performance certificate was that it wouldn't actually ignite, as far as I...
So it was your understanding that the ACM would either melt or would somehow remove itself from the building, but wouldn't ignite?
Yes.
What would be the mechanism for that?
What, that it would melt?
Well, what would be the mechanism for melting but not igniting?
Well, if there's a fire with the heat, it will melt. It may, and as a Chalcots, it burns away.
Was it your understanding that the tests which the BBA certificate had said that the panels had passed nonetheless allowed it to melt and fall off the building?
Yes.
Really? Okay. Given what you told us about Class 0 this morning, which was that Class 0 meant that the material was of limited combustibility throughout, as you told us, how does that reconcile with the idea that ACM would be gone rather quickly in a fire?
I said that Class O throughout indicated to me that it was of limited combustibility, and that ordinary Class O was just Class O. So that would... do you want to look that up?
I'm not sure I understand, to be honest. Can we try it a different way? Given your
Well, I
understanding...
think Mr. Bailey was going to explain.
I'm sorry.
Did you want to explain, Mr. Bailey?
Yes, I think the confusion with regard to Class O is if it's Class O, it is not of limited combustibility, but if it's Class O throughout, it is what I took to be of limited combustibility. So the Renabon panels are just Class O. The assertion was made in the Celetex literature that the product was Class O throughout. That was the distinction that I was making.
Right. Thank you.
Did you think that the point about ACM would be being gone rather quickly in a fire was something that needed to be escalated to the attention of building control or Exova or Ryden or Studio E for that matter?
No, I thought it was a well understood result of a fire, be it ACM or aluminium or glass. If there's fire on it, it will break.
So you assumed that each of Studio E, Ryden, Exova and building control would have known what you knew, namely that ACM would be gone rather quickly in a fire, and you didn't need to take that up with them or tell them about your knowledge or concerns about that.
No, it's not just ACM.
No, I understand what you're saying, but I think the answer to my question is no, you didn't, because you assumed that they would know the same as you did.
And, yes, I think certainly that time, and looking at, I think it was Neil Crawford's evidence, he was well aware of aluminium panels would melt.
Can we look at HAR 4096596, please? This is an email chain on the 1st of April 2015 from Simon Lawrence to Ben Bailey and to you, which is the end, I think, the end result of this exchange. Building control officer now in agreement with the fire protection in the cladding being a cavity barrier rather than fire stoppers first thought. Good news. Did you, when you got this, did you read the email chain below it, including John Hoban's 1st of April email to Neil Crawford at Studio E, copied to Simon Lawrence, as we can see there?
I can't recall. Can you bring it up?
It should be on. Oh, yes, you're quite right. It's not on the screen. It is just below it, page 1 over to page 2. No, it's still page 1, but still on the screen. Yes, you can see there that he refers to some drawings. Does John Hoban in the second paragraph?
Yes.
He says, I have no adverse comments to make on the cladding proposals shown on your drawings, 1279, 120, 121, Harley's drawing C1059 325 Rev C, and then he refers to another drawing in the next paragraph, 127906 121 Rev 0 to that standard. Did you yourself review the drawings referred to in John Hoban's email at the time?
I don't think so, no.
Did Simon Lawrence tell you that John Hoban had not commented on a set of Harley drawings that Studio E had provided to RBKC Building Control on the 6th of March 2015?
No, he hadn't.
And those drawings which had been sent by Kevin Lamb of Harley to Simon Lawrence on the 3rd of March? No?
I can't recall.
For our reference purposes, there are SEA 50252, just for the transcript. Did you seek to clarify with Ryden or Studio E whether RBKC's Building Control had any comments to make on Harley's drawings that Studio E had sent to it on the 6th of March?
No, the procedure is that we pass the drawings to, well, technically to Ryden, but practically to the architects, and they deal with building control. In my experience, subcontractors almost never talk direct to building control.
Just on that, then, can I just come to a point I was going to come to later? Did you ever have a discussion with John Hoban yourself?
No.
Whether on-site or off-site?
No.
Did you ever have a discussion with anybody at RBKC Building Control?
No.
Right. Just going back to this, did you or anybody else at Harley, to your knowledge, assume on receipt of Simon Lawrence's email of the 1st of April that we can see there that Building Control had no adverse comments to make on the drawings that Studio E had sent to RBKC Building
Correct.
Control? Right. Were you aware, looking or having seen those 4 drawings, if you had looked at them, that there were no cavity barriers around the windows?
There wouldn't have been.
When you say they wouldn't have been, I think we've established earlier that there should have been.
No, you said, was I aware that those drawings didn't show that?
Correct.
And the answer was yes.
Thank you. Now, can I ask you to look at HAR 403947? This is Ben Bailey's email to you, 30th of March 2015, as well as Kevin Lamb and Mark Stapley. And he's forwarding to you an email he had got the same day from Chris Mort at Cider Eyes, which attached some drawings. Now, can I just look at the first paragraph of that email? Just below it, halfway down the screen. He says, "Hi, Ben. I've reviewed the drawings sent over and sketched a proposal to alleviate the issues raised by the BCO, Building Control Officer. Also on the second page of the attachment, I have highlighted the weak link, so to speak, in terms of fire, and I think the BCO would also would have also noticed this." Now, let's look at the drawing where he identifies the weak link. This is HAR 403948, please. And if you look, please, at the second drawing down there, you can see where he has put a pink or orange squiggly cloud around the bracket and said weak link for fire. Did you look at that drawing when it was forwarded to you by Ben Bailey on the 30th of March?
I'm not sure if I saw it on the 30th of March, but I've seen it subsequently.
But did you see it subsequently before the end of the project?
Yes.
You did. And did you note what Chris Mort had said in his email, which was being forwarded to you, namely that he's highlighted the weak link?
Yes.
You did. Now, you do say in your statement, and it's paragraph 69, I don't think I need to show it to you, that you believed you would have read this email, but had already seen the email chain of the 1st of April by the time you read Chris Mort's email. Does that mean that you did notice or didn't notice the drawing which, at that stage, identified a weak link for fire at the head of the window?
I'm not sure I saw it at the time, but maybe a little bit later.
Right. If you did notice the weak link for fire even a little bit later on the drawing, what did you do in response to being told that there was a weak link for fire in that location, the bracket at the head of the window?
Well, when I read that, it was in the context of we were trying to, or that there was going to be a 2-hour fire stopping required. And if we only had a cavity barrier, then everything to do with the 2-hour fire stopping actually ceased to be an issue. Looking at this drawing here, what's not clear on the drawing to Chris Mort is whether that is a continuous shelf angle at the head or individual brackets, one of which would be a weak link and the other wouldn't.
Did you seek to bring this email and the drawing to the attention of Studio E?
No, we didn't.
Why is that?
Because, as I've explained, it was read in the context of achieving a 120-minute fire stopping as opposed to a 30-15 cavity barrier.
So, did you just ignore what Mr. Mort was saying?
No, I don't think. I thought he had the wrong end of the stick.
You thought you got? Did you go back to Chris Mort or ask anybody else at Harley, such as Ben, to go back to Chris Mort and tell him that he got the wrong end of the stick?
No, I didn't.
Why is that?
I don't know.
Did you bring this to the attention of RBKC Building Control? That the manufacturer's representative was of the view that there was a weak link in this location for fire?
This isn't. Well, no, we didn't.
You see, Mr. Mort, as I've shown you from his email, was of the view that the building control officer would also have noticed this. So if Mr. Mort was telling you that, why not just verify it with Mr. Hoban and say, look, the manufacturer has picked this up. He thinks you might have picked it up. What's the position?
No, that would have been a better thing to do, yes.
Well, it would have been a better thing to do if you were reliant on Mr. Hoban, I suppose. But given that this was something which had been flagged by the manufacturer, wasn't it the only sensible thing to do?
Yes.
Would it be normal on a construction project for a specialist external facade contractor like Harley to be made aware by a manufacturer of a weak link for fire in the external facade and not then bring that to the attention of the building control body?
I don't think we've ever had this situation before, no.
If Harley were reliant, as I think you have said to some extent yesterday, on building control, how could John Hoban ever have given an informed final decision in relation to what was installed, at least here, so far as fire safety was concerned, if he wasn't fully apprised of the potential risks as identified by the manufacturer?
Building control have the drawings, and I'm not sure that this is actually a weak link if that is a continuous aluminium angle along the head of the window.
Mr. Chairman, is that a convenient moment?
Yes, I think it probably is. Thank you. We'll have another break now, Mr. Bailey.
Okay.
We'll come back at 20 to 4, please.
Okay.
I'll give you a bit of time to have a break. And no talking again, please, about your evidence. All right? Thank you very much. You gave the usher. Thank you. 20 to 4, please. Yes, would you ask Mr. Bailey to come back in, please? Right, you ready, Mr. Bailey?
I am.
Thank you. Yes, Mr. Millett.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Bailey, I would like to ask you now some questions about infill panels on this project. Can I ask you to go, please, to your statement at page 29, paragraph 115? And you say there, as explained previously, the windows were formed from aluminium profiles and were double glazed with units of toughened glass. Between the glazed units were insulated infill panels. As far as I was aware, or I am aware, these were suitable for use in Grenfell Tower and are used on buildings across the UK. Now, can I go, please, to HAR 408886? This is an elevation drawing produced by Kevin Lamb, as we can see, dated the 22nd of September 2014. This is revision D of the 3rd of March 2015. Do you see that?
Yes.
And it was stamped approved for construction. Just out of interest, who would normally stamp approved for construction on a Harley drawing?
The approved for construction stamp is an internal stamp, so that when it arrives on site, the guys are only working to the latest revision.
I see. Who would apply it normally?
Kevin.
Kevin, I see. So would he do the drawing and then stamp it approved for construction?
Once it's been through the approval process,
I see.
he'd actually put that on.
That was the norm, was it?
That's the norm.
Now, he shows here 2 areas of infill panel identified as P1 and P2. Can you see those?
I'll take your word. I can't read it, but I'll take your word for it.
Well, I'll see if I can help. P1, we may be able to blow this up a bit more if we can. That would be great. If you can see, there are hatched areas there, big ones and a small one.
Yes.
Looking at the left-hand side, you can see the big square hatched area is P1, top left-hand corner there, and P2 is the smaller hatched area.
Yes.
Yes. Now, the big one, P1, is the big panel that sits between the windows of the kitchen and the bedroom, isn't it?
It is.
And P2 is the little panel within the window itself which housed the kitchen extract fans. Is that right?
Correct.
Yes. Now, those panels are also marked on the window schedule for the upper floors, which you forwarded to CEP, the fabricators. Can we just see a document, CEP 50493, please? This is an email from you to Jeff Blades of CEP, 4th December 2014, and you attach a drawing and you say window schedule for upper floors. Do you know why you were sending Mr. Blades that drawing and not Daniel Untitled Jones or Kevin Lamb?
I can't recall.
Well, let's see if we can look at the drawing to see if it helps. CEP 50494. This comes from CEP's documents. And we can see there that there are a number of different types of drawings, each identifying P1 and P2 panels. Can we see that? Do you remember looking at this drawing and similar drawings?
Yes.
Yeah. Did you ever make any investigations into what materials made up P1 and P2?
No, from the specification on the key drawing, there was a makeup shown on that, yes.
The specification on the key drawing. Let's see how we go. We may come to it. Can you please go to HAR 403882? This is an email. Well, it isn't an email. This is a meeting note, actually, of January 2015. I'm not sure you can see the date on the first page, but it's progress meeting number 1 of 2015. And in attendance were Mr. Maxwell, you, Mr. Stapley, and Kevin Lamb. You see that?
Yes.
Do you remember the meeting?
Not offhand, no.
No. Let's look down to page 3 and look at item 8. Item 8, sandwich panels, RAL 9010, sourced from new supplier. Who was the original supplier? Do you know?
I don't.
Do you know why you had to find a new supplier?
I don't.
Just on there, while we're on it, there's also a reference to Aluca bond panels to be ordered at item 13. Can you explain that?
I think I said yesterday that a Luke Bond is to ACM what Hoover is to vacuum cleaners.
I see what you mean. Right, so that meant ACM.
Yes.
In fact, they were Rainer bond.
Yes.
Right, just to clear that up. Now, can you please go to HAR 403866? This is the January version, the first version of a document we looked at earlier on, the Harley Specification Notes. Do you remember earlier today, Mr. Bailey, we looked at the July version of this?
We did.
Revision. This is the very first one, as we can see, 15th of January 2015. And if you look, please, with me, you can see on the left-hand side that Mr. Lamb, if you ignore the red annotations, specified under glazing P1, outer 2mm aluminium skin, RAL 10010 matte, and then core 24mm Kingspan TP10 rigid insulation, and then inner, again the aluminium RAL 9010, and then the P2 also had a core of 24mm Kingspan TP10 rigid insulation. First of all, did you see this document when it was first produced in January 2015?
No.
Now, looking at the red annotations, they amended the dimensions of the aluminium skins on both P1 and P2, as you can see, but they also amended the core from Kingspan TP10 rigid insulation to 25mm of styrofoam. Can you explain when that decision was made?
What's the date of the drawing?
The date of the date of the document is the 15th of January 2015. You can see that from the bottom right-hand corner if we just...
Do we know what date the revision A was?
We can, offhand, we can go to another document. We can. I'll try and answer your question by showing you RYD 30468222. I don't want to go around in circles, but you can certainly see that from this document, this is revision D of 15th July 2015, and that tells us from the box that the first revision A, is the 3rd of March 2015. So, answering your question and
It would have been between those two dates.
Yeah, exactly. Right, fine. Do you know who, going back, if we can then, to the red annotations on HAR 403866, do you know whose red annotations those were?
I don't know who's there, but they look like they might be Mark Stapley's writing.
Right. Now, do you know why styrofoam was to be substituted for Kingspan TP10 as the core of these infill panels?
I don't.
Now, if we just move on a little bit, can we go to HAR 403869? You can see that this is the version dated 26th of January 2015. I'm sorry, dated the 15th of January 2015, but now marked by Studio E architects with a B. You can see that. But if you look at the rev box, there are no revisions. So we can narrow our time frame down to the changes, I think, to between the 15th of January and the 26th of January 2015, can't we?
Yes.
Yes, because we can then see, if we pan out again, that the core for glazing for P1 had by then been changed in the printed form of this document from Kingspan TP10 to styrofoam. You see that?
Yes.
Can you explain how that came about, or why that decision was made
I can't.
during that time frame, between 15th of January and 20th? You can't. 26th of January. All right. Do you know why Mr. Lamb, as it appears, adopted that change for P1 but not for P2? As you can see, the core there for P2 remained Kingspan TP10 rigid insulation.
I don't know.
This version, as you can see, went to Studio E, who approved it as conforming to design intent, but subject to a comment that I don't think we need to get into. You can't explain why for P1 but not P2. Did you or Kevin Lamb, to your knowledge, tell the author of the red annotations, who may have been Mark Stapley, that his prescription of styrofoam was being followed for P1 but not for P2?
No.
Now, can we look at your witness statement, page 23, please? You say at paragraph 92, all the materials used in the building envelope were specified within Studio E's NBS specification. That's not correct, is it? Because the P1 and P2 materials were specified by Harley, not by Studio E in the NBS spec.
That may be correct.
Well, we can't find anywhere in the NBS spec where we find either styrofoam or TP10 as the material to be used in the core of the sandwich panels.
And there's no annotation on their design drawings?
So, well, can you help us?
If it's not actually in the NBS spec, it may be in the original pack of drawings.
Well, we haven't been able to find.
You can't find it.
We haven't been able to find anything at all specifying the material for the core for P1 or P2 infill panels anywhere in the in the NBS spec or the drawings. So we are proceeding on the assumption that that came from Harley, and I'm interested to know whether you agree, and if so, why that is.
Without the looking at all the documents, I can't disagree with you.
And you can't, I think, help us why it is that the infill panel at P1 became styrofoam, but P2 remained TP10.
No, I can't.
Styrofoam is the trading name for extruded polystyrene insulation material, or XPS, isn't it?
It is.
Do you know why a named product was not specified at this point in the design process?
Sorry.
Yes, do you know why a named product was being specified at this point?
No, I think, again, styrofoam is a commonly used trade name for that type of product.
Right. So given that styrofoam is a trade name, well, a bit like Hoover, I think is your example before. Given that styrofoam was the Hoover of extruded polystyrene, do you know then why a named product wasn't specified in the way that TP10 was for that material? Now, Do you accept that styrofoam is an insulation product?
It is.
And do you accept that it was not a material of limited combustibility?
I do.
Do you accept that it should not, therefore, have been specified for the P1 panel?
I think there is a debate on that because it is bonded to two skins of aluminium. So it can be classed as a Class O product, and because it's in a window rather than a rain screen cladding, I don't believe that that's covered by ADB2.
Did you believe that at the time?
Yeah, windows are always a bit an oddity with regard to this.
Was it your view at the time that the P1 panel was not part of the external wall construction for the purposes of approved document B?
Yes.
Was that a view that you discussed with anyone at Studio E at the time?
No.
Was it a view you discussed with anybody at the time?
No, it is just one of those oddities that the windows seem to fall outside of the cladding.
Now, you say it can be classed as a Class 0 product. Did you know of any tests or any certificates in relation to these panels which could have shown you that it was Class 0?
No, I'm just looking at ADB2, which has two skins of aluminium with a bonded core that's integral to it. It can be a Class O product.
Did you know of any tests or certificates which showed you that it had passed, that there was either a material of limited combustibility or had passed a BSA 414 test?
No, because it's it's not a product that we believe was of limited combustibility.
Now, can I turn to the P2 panel? We saw earlier that that was specified as being Kingspan TP10 and remained Kingspan TP10 throughout the Harley spec from January to July 2015. Did you know that Kingspan TP10 rigid insulation was in fact a PIR insulation product sold for use as a roofing insulation? I
didn't.
Can we look at the BBA certificate for it, which is at KIN 50276? This is the BBA certificate for TP10, Kingspan Thermopitch TP10, and it's dated first issue, 30th of January 2009. And on page 1 we can see that the product is described under the heading Product Scope and Summary of Certificate. You see, it says this certificate relates to the Kingspan Thermopitch TP10 board a warm roof insulation system using rigid polyisocyanurate PIR board faced on both sides with aluminium foil for use in pitched roofs in new and existing domestic and non-domestic buildings. Can I assume that you didn't read this BBA certificate at the time of the Grenfell Tower project?
I've not seen this.
Do you know whether anybody at Harley did?
I would suspect that Kevin has read it.
You suspect that he has read it. Do you know that?
I don't. You need to ask Kevin.
Okay. And Kevin, because he was the one who pulled together the Harley spec, is that why?
Yes.
Are you saying that you wouldn't have expected Kevin Lamb to have specified Kingspan Thermopitch TP10 in that document unless he had read the certificate? Is that what you would have expected of him?
I would have expected. I know he's used this on other projects, not for us, but for other people he works for. So it's a product that he's familiar with.
You know that. On those other projects which you say he's used it on, where did you think or know that he had used it?
I don't know which projects they were.
Where in the building?
Sorry,
Where in the building do you think Kevin Lamb had previously used or specified Thermopitch TP10?
on other window infill panels.
I see. And how did you know that?
Because he told me he was familiar with them.
In what context did he tell you that?
But when we were, I said, why have we got, what is this? And this is after the fire, not at the time. What's the difference? And he said, I specified TP10 because I used it all the time.
I see. So this is a conversation after the fire?
It was, yeah.
Not during the project?
No.
I follow. Looking at the description, it's quite clear that it was a PIR insulation product for use as a roofing insulation. Do you know why Kevin Lamb specified this product for use in the external wall construction, or if not in the external wall construction, nonetheless as a window infill panel, when it was a product intended for use in pitched roof constructions?
No.
Looking at the certificate now, are you surprised that Kevin Lamb thought it appropriate to use Thermopitch TP10 as a window panel or infill panel material?
No.
Now, later down page 1 on the certificate gives a summary of the product's fire performance. And it says that the product will not contribute to the development stages of a fire or present a smoke or toxic hazard. When tested to BS 4767, the product achieved a Class 1 rating, see Section 7. Is it fair to say that there was no evidence that this product met the definition for limited combustibility?
I would agree with that.
Yeah. And hadn't been tested to achieve any combustibility rating under either the Euro classes or the UK combustibility classification system?
No, but it was it was bonded to 2 sheets of aluminium. So I believe that actually, given that both the sheets of aluminium are of limited combustibility in that configuration, it counts as Class O.
But it didn't achieve Class O, Class 0, did it?
No, but by dint of the fact it was bonded to 2 sheets of limited combustibility material, the product itself, as I understand it, conforms to Class O.
Well, it tells you, if you look at the certificate, that it was tested under 4767 and the product achieved a Class 1 rating. Doesn't say a Class 0.
No, that is just the insulation itself.
Well, it's
I
the
think
product.
it may be at cross purposes. I think, if I've understood you correctly, Mr. Bailey, what you're saying is you take this TP10,
Yes,
which doesn't test to Class 0, but then you encase it in aluminium,
yes,
and then viewed overall, the resulting product can be regarded as Class 0.
that's my
That's
understanding,
what you're
yes.
saying, isn't it?
Who produced the panels which included the Thermopitch TP10 as the insulation material, or the middle, if you like, of the panel?
I may be wrong, but I think it was Panel Systems.
Did you ever see any certificate in relation to the product that Panel Systems provided?
No, I didn't.
Now, I want now to turn to some questions about the selection of Harley's subcontractors, and I want to look at Osborne Berry in particular. Can I please go to your statement at page 19, please, paragraph 75. You say there, from Harley's perspective, work began on site in around October 2014 and was completed in around May or June of 2016. The stages of work were as follows. 1, erection of mast climbers. 2, commencement of installation of brackets and rails and insulation. 3, window installation. And 4, the final stage, which would have been the cladding installation. The installation work was carried out by Osborne Berry Installation Limited, supervised by Mark Osborne and Graham Berry, with whom Harley had worked on a number of previous projects. So is it right to say that the installation of the brackets and rails and insulation, windows and cladding were not carried out by Harley employees, but by a subcontractor called Osborne Berry?
Correct.
Do you know why Harley didn't undertake the installation works itself?
We don't employ installers.
It's right, I think, that there was no written contract with Osborne Berry in relation to the Grenfell Tower works that they were to carry out, was there?
There wasn't.
No. Why is that?
It is not uncommon practice for us to employ subcontractors on an agreed price and not actually have a written contract.
Right. If you look at paragraph 97 of your statement on page 24, you say, the installation of the external facade was subcontracted to Osborne Berry, with whom Harley had worked for many years on a number of large projects. The directors of Osborne Berry are Mark Taff Osborne and Graham Bez Berry, both of whom are highly experienced in installing external facades. Did you, or anyone else at Harley, look for any installation subcontractors other than Osborne Berry?
We have a list of 4 or 5 subcontract glazing companies that we use and that we've used over the years. On this particular project, we decided that Osborne Berry were probably the right team to use. So it was a negotiated contract with them.
How did you decide that Osborne Berry were, as you put it, probably the right team to use?
They were finishing up another project, were becoming available at the time that the project was due to start.
What processes did Harley have in place to ensure that its subcontractors were competent to undertake the works for which they were to be subcontracted?
That's the reason that we have a list of 4 or 5 subcontract companies that we work with, and only those guys, and we've worked with them with Osborne Berry for, well, I've known them for 30 years, and they've worked on some other large projects for Harley of a similar nature.
Right. What do or did subcontractors have to do to become approved by Harley, to be able to get onto Harley's list?
Normally, if a new subcontractor we would take on if we had a new contracts manager came to work for us, for example, who'd had a good relationship with a subcontract fixing company, and we would start them off on one project, and if they were successful, we would move them to other projects.
Did price play a role in your selection of Osborne Berry for this project?
No, price is obviously important, but the fixers actually have a pretty standard installation rate per square metre for putting something, and they're all very much the same.
Had you used Osborne Berry on Chalkerts?
No.
Who had you used on Chalkerts?
W. Kenny.
Yeah. And what about on the Ferrier Point?
W. Kenny had done that.
What other high-rise projects had you used Osborne Berry on prior to Grenfell Tower?
6 blocks at Little Venice.
Right.
Clements Court in Heathrow, and not City Road, but another project in East London.
Okay. Can I just ask you then to look at slightly different topic, an email at RYD 3029683. This is an email of the 2nd of February 2015, sent by Simon Lawrence to Rob Maxwell, into which you were copied. And he says, Rob, I've asked Simon to arrange meetings on site this week with yourselves to go through the programme, deliveries, etc. Unfortunately, you seem to be a hard man to get in contact with. This means that we are getting information from your subcontractors on site. This is not ideal. As far as I'm concerned, we need Harley supervision permanently on site, as promised, from now on, to ensure the programme is achieved and that we have clear, contactable lines of communication. Also, we have major concerns about your current labour levels. All mast climbers should be running full tilt from now on, but they aren't. Please call Simon urgently to remedy this situation before it gets out of hand. How frequently were Harley employees attending the site at this time, February 2015?
I would say twice a week.
So Mr. Lawrence was right, wasn't he, then, that there was no Harley person permanently on site at this time?
No, we had no. We wanted a site camera. We had no site facilities on site, so it was difficult for us. We asked for site facilities, but they weren't available.
Who did you ask for site facilities?
Simon Lawrence.
And what did he tell you?
There's no room.
When did he tell you that?
When we started on site, probably October time.
Did you press him after that?
We did, but they would only allow. There's a small play area to the west of the building, and that was full of cabins, and we weren't allowed, so I'm told, to stack the cabins.
Could you share one with another subcontractor or with Ryden?
There just wasn't room. The best we ever got was sitting at the end of a Ryden desk. If one of their guys was out on site, I mean, they had quite a lot of people on site at the time.
After this email, did Harley implement full-time site supervision?
No, we'd never had full-time site supervision.
You see, it looks from this email that Mr. Lawrence is telling Harley, and you as a copy on this email, that he was concerned that he needed Harley supervision permanently on site, as promised. Who had promised that there would be Harley supervision permanently on site, as he records here?
That would have been Rob.
How could Rob Maxwell, that is, promise permanent supervision on site if, as you say, Mr. Lawrence had kept telling him there was no room?
That's a good question.
Well, what's the answer to that?
I have no idea why he said that.
After this email, given what he was after, did Mr. Lawrence get the satisfaction of having Harley supervision permanently on site?
Not permanently, but more frequently.
More frequently. How was Harley supervising the works, both before and after this email, to ensure appropriate workmanship by its subcontractors if it didn't have operatives constantly on site?
When we have mast climbers, we can't have people permanently going up and down in the mast climbers. So when work reaches a certain stage, there is a series of handover sheets produced to check the quality of the work. But it's not. In the first stage, Osborne Berry will check their own work, that they're happy with it, and offer it to us. We'll carry out a check. It's not 100%. Every nut, bolt and screw checked. Once we're happy with the quality of work that's coming to us, we'll check it and then hand it over to Rydens to inspect, and when they're happy with it, they pass it over to the clerk of works to inspect. So there's a 4-stage checking on the works.
after this email, how frequently did Harley attend site?
I think I said we'll be on site 3-4 times a week.
3 or 4 times a week. After this email, but before this email?
Twice a week.
I see. And after this email, who was the Harley operative most frequently on site?
Most frequently would be Ben Bailey.
Right, and in fact, I think we know that Ben Bailey was appointed Harley's project manager in February, or about February 2015. Was that in response to this message?
It was happening anyway.
Right. And therefore, after that, Ben Bailey would attend site 3 or 4 times a week?
Yes.
Okay, I see. Can I then go to another topic, which is standard of work and residence complaints? Can I just ask you to look at RYD 3044349? This is an email from Simon Lawrence to Steve Blake dated the 22nd of June 2015. Now, you're not copied in, and you would not have seen this email before, I don't think. If you look at the second paragraph, it says, at the moment, we have a poorly performing site, which is mainly but not totally caused by poor surveying and cheap, incompetent subcontractors. Were you ever given the impression by Mr. Lawrence that he thought that there were cheap and incompetent subcontractors on site?
No.
Did he ever accuse you of being cheap and incompetent?
No.
Or at least incompetent, if not cheap?
No.
Did Harley have a process in place for ensuring that its work and those of its subcontractors, such as Osborne Berry, was carried out appropriately and to proper standards?
We had check sheets and carried out handover inspections.
Did you have a system in place that if concerns were expressed about the quality of the workmanship by Osborne Berry, those would be escalated to you and you would handle them?
Yes.
What was that system?
If there is an issue with the quality, it's returned back from Rydens, and we put it right. If it's not put right, then Rydens will call me and tell me.
So Ryden was the route, was it?
Yeah, it will come back through us, through Harley, and if we don't deal with it, Ryden will get involved and call me.
Can I then ask you to look at RYD 3085661? This is an email into which you were copied late on in the project. It's dated the 12th of January 2017 from Emma Kelly at Ryden to Ben Bailey and you, copied to David Hughes. Urgent update, Grenfell Tower windows. And Emma Kelly sets out a large number of defects relating to windows open on our system, and then she sets them all out. Just looking at this email, do you recall it?
I'm not sure that I recall that, but I've obviously seen it.
All right. Now, she says, as I've said, there are a large number of defects relating to windows open on our system, some of which have been open as long as August. And she says, this is not acceptable, and we are not receiving any response from our chaser emails or calls. We must ensure that defects are closed out within the target rectification time provided. Please ensure that we're provided with a thorough update by close of play today. Failure to do this will result in the issue being escalated. And then you can see that there are a number of open items or open defects relating to windows set out there. And some of them, as you can see, go back to August and September 2016, if you look at the dates in the second column. You see that?
Yes.
Had you been notified prior to this by Ryden of these defects, or was this all news to you at the time?
There are defects in inverted commas notices that come through, and we will deal with them as swiftly as practically possible. What I mean by that is that a lot of these tilt and turn windows which don't work or where they've gone out of operation. So when you open a tilt and turn window, you'll turn the handle through 90 degrees to tilt it and then turn it through another 90 degrees to open it. If during the process you try to pull the window when the handle's half open, it will disengage. That is a very, very simple thing to put right by pressing the reset button and closing it. So a lot of these, when they're saying there's a defect with the window, it's simply that.
Well, you say that. In fact, the first one is a tilt and turn window sticking, but the rest of them don't appear to be anything to do with the tilt and turn mechanism. Let's look at them.
Well, you'll find that the vast majority, and we've also been called back for a leaking a window to find actually when we turned up to the chap's flat, he had a leaking tap in his kitchen. So these are not. These are not all necessarily what they seem. And we've also attended a number of these flats to find there's no one's in when we get there. So this isn't quite as black and white as it appears.
How can you account, taking the first item, which is a tilt and turn complaint, how can you account for a delay of some 5 months between the 23rd of August and the 12th of January to deal with that?
Without the specific details of it, we could have been back 3 or 4 times to get in there and not been able to get in.
It looks from this email that the defects were being notified to Ryden by residents in the tower, not as a result of inspections by you or anybody else.
Well, this is 2017 when we left site.
Yes. I see. So would it be normal then to have this number of complaints open and undealt with, often as long as 5 months afterwards, some months after practical completion?
I think we've got 3,000 opening windows on the job, so this isn't a big. But what we want to do when we go back is batch them. So if we have 5 windows to do, we really want to do 5 windows in one visit rather than one visit 5 times.
Were you caused by this email to be concerned about some of the quality of the work on site or some of the quality of the material?
No, I think the bulk of these is to do, and the report of what they are. Kitchen window not closing, window doesn't. These are to do with a mechanism that probably 9 times out of 10 are to do with the window being operated incorrectly.
And what did you do to remedy these defects? Do you remember?
When we went there, we remedied them. There's probably half a dozen windows on the job where the top arm connector had broken, which is probably because they've been dropped when the window's been out of mode. So we needed new parts to change those. The rest of them are pretty much resetting the handle mechanism.
Yes, thank you. Mr. Chairman, Mr. Bailey, I've come to the end of my questions. It's now customary for us to take a short break just to see whether there are any sweep-up questions I've missed or whether there are questions from elsewhere that I should be putting as a result of follow-up.
Do you think 10 minutes would be enough?
I think so, for the time being, and if I need a little bit more, may I
You can come and
apply
explain.
through the usual channels? Thank you.
Mr. Bailey, as Mr. Millets explained, he's got to the end of the questions he's prepared, but he needs to take a moment or two to check there aren't any more things he needs to cover. So we're going to break for 10 minutes, and then we'll see if he's got some more questions. So if you'd like to give the usher, remember the no talking rule.
Yes.
And we'll come back at 25 to 5.
Okay.
Right? Thank you very much. Right, 25 to 5 then, please. Okay. Well, have you found some more questions, Mr. Millett?
Just one or two.
Right, thank you. Could you ask Mr. Bailey to come back, please? Right, Mr. Bailey, I think Mr. Millett has one or two questions, but
Okay.
we'll see. Yes, Mr.
Mr. Bailey, I took you earlier to Chris Mort's, he's the ciderised chap, and his warning about the weak link for fire. Do you recall that
I do.
evidence from this afternoon? And you told us that you thought he had the wrong end of the stick, and you also said that you didn't think that it was actually a weak link if a continuous aluminium angle along the head of the window was used. Do you remember that evidence?
I do.
Just for our purposes, that's at page 142, line 16, and page 144, line 5, just so we have it in the transcript. Can I ask you to look, please, at ADB, at CLG 50224, page 86. And you'll see here, paragraph 9.13. And you can see under the note there, cavity barriers provided around openings may be formed by the window or door frame if the frame is constructed of steel or timber of the minimum thickness in A or B above as appropriate. And there you can see steel would have to be at least 0.5 millimetre thick and timber at least 38 millimetres thick. There's nothing in there which permits a cavity barrier to be formed by a continuous aluminium angle or any other aluminium material, is there?
No, and again, I think there's a slight misconception here. Can you bring the drawing back up?
Can I do what?
Bring that drawing back up.
The drawing by Mr. Mort?
Yes.
Yes, I can. And I will show it to you. It is at HAR 403948. And it's the second drawing down. Weak link for fire.
Yes, we're not suggesting at that point that the aluminium angle is a cavity barrier. What we have here on the inside is the internal finishes by others, which should provide a fireproof seal to the back of that angle. So, and the reason that I think that he thought perhaps it was weak is if it's individual brackets, there's gaps in the aluminium, and if it got past the barrier on the inside, which should have been 2 skins of plasterboard, then it would enter the cavity. But we didn't consider it as an issue because the angle was continuous. It wasn't acting as a cavity barrier.
So you say it wasn't a problem because of the presence of an aluminium object in the way, to put it in very lay terms.
It's not, that angle is not the cavity barrier. It's not its function to be the cavity barrier. But because it's continuous, it actually has a beneficial effect compared to having individual brackets, which would lead a gap there.
But if you weren't permitted to use anything other than wood or steel to the relevant thicknesses as a cavity barrier...
I'm not saying it is a cavity barrier.
No, let me finish the question. If, as 9.13, as I've shown you, says you can only use as a cavity barrier in those locations steel or wood to the relevant thicknesses, how could you rely on aluminium as a functional equivalent?
It wasn't the thing which prevents the fire entering that zone is provided by the internal lining.
So in what way had Chris Mort got the wrong end of the stick then?
Well, I don't think it's taken into account the lining, and that's why I think he's got the wrong end of the stick.
Your explanation, as I understand it, was that it wasn't a weak link if there was a continuous aluminium angle along the head of the window.
Yeah, it's far, far better to have a continuous angle along the head.
But that's not something that's recommended or even suggested by ADB, is it?
No, we're not suggesting that it's a cavity barrier.
Now, I have a final question for you, Mr. Bailey. We've been through a great deal of evidence over the last 2 days, and we are very grateful for your assistance. Looking back on all of that evidence, and looking back on your involvement in general in the Grenfell Tower project as a whole, is there anything that you would have done differently?
I've been asking myself that for the past 3 years. Looking back to what we knew then, the certification that we had, the industry practices that are used throughout the UK, if we were faced with the same job now, I suspect, I'm pretty certain that we'd have done it exactly as we did back then. There's no one, I couldn't for a second, that anybody in the construction team working on Grenfell or on the hundreds of other buildings that we can similarly constructed across the UK, nobody thought for 1 minute that anything we were doing was unsafe. But if I could go back in time, armed with what I know now, with the certification, the testing regimes, the caveats, the misinterpretation of the building regulations, that are not just restricted to us, but the whole industry. This stuff, Renabon, Celetex, Kingspan, none of it would be on the wall. The legislation is complicated to use. It's not very clear. I think any form of combustible insulation or cladding should be banned immediately. That's not my place to say, but if the building regs banned it, it wouldn't be on the building. Class O, when I sort of understand how that came to being, was some industry self-interest body created this fourth class, and it's clouded everybody's judgment and belief over the past 40 years. So yes, we would do something. Sorry, I'm ranting.
No, you say what you want to say, please.
No, it's no. Yeah, things need to change.
All right.
Mr. Bailey, thank you very much.
Thank you.
I have no further questions for you.
Yeah,
Mr. Chairman, I have no further questions.
Well, Mr. Bailey, it's been quite a long period for you to give evidence, and it may not have been a very easy task for you to undertake. But we are very grateful to you for coming to tell us what you know, and it's been very helpful to hear from you. So thank you very much indeed. It's all over now. Those are all the questions we have for you. So you are now free to go.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Right, thank you very much, Mr. Millett.
Thank you, Mr.
That's
Chairman.
it for the day, I take it.
That's it for the day.
And
tomorrow we
have another witness.
We have another witness, Mr. Mark Harris, who will be giving evidence from a remote location.
Yes, good. Thank you very much. At 10 o'clock tomorrow, please.